You think maintenance is paperwork and clean floors? Not here. Here the work site is the edge of a field under artillery fire. July 1943, Kursk. The ground is dry and rutted. The air tastes like dust and hot fuel. Your job is to keep armored vehicles moving when every minute adds to the risk of never coming back. You are a field repair technician in a frontline recovery unit. The tools are simple: jacks, chains, blocks, hand hoists, welding sets, no crane, no warehouse of spares, no safe hangar. The orders are clear and short. Pull a disabled tank out of the gray zone, diagnose fast, repair what you can on the spot, and get it rolling or get it towed before the area turns into a killing ground again. A mistake is not a missed deadline. A mistake is a broken tow rope that whips a man off his feet. A misrouted cable that drags a hull the wrong way into a mine. A bad diagnosis that wastes 2 hours and leaves a crew without a vehicle at dawn. You work with noise you cannot control, with smoke you cannot avoid, with light that goes away exactly when you need to see the crack on a bogie or the leak in a radiator. You start before sunrise because aircraft hunt in daylight. You move in short bursts because the line of contact is not a line at all. Positions change with every barrage. Landmarks shift. Tracks overlap. Yesterday's safe route is today's trap. You learn to check the ground twice before you lie down to reach a drain plug. You learn to keep the acetylene valve closed without looking. You learn to keep one ear for engines and one ear for incoming shells, all while counting the turns on a jack handle. Water is not a comfort item. Water is a resource to allocate. Radiators need it. You need it. Boiling is not always possible. Clean water is rare. You ration by habit, and you hate that habit, because thirst makes hands shake, and shaking hands drop pins and nuts into mud you will have to dig by touch. Heat pulls energy out of you. Then a storm turns the same road into a glue pit that swallows a jack base and sinks a truck to its axle. You do not wait for parts. You harvest them. A tank with a smashed turret is still a donor for a final drive. A burned truck is still a donor for a leaf spring and a battery clamp. You do not ask for permission to improvise, but you do not improvise blindly. You compare wear marks, count splines, measure by feel when a gauge is missing, and decide whether a good enough fit will run for 10 kilometers or for 50. You keep records in your head because paper gets wet, and you keep priorities in your pocket because the plan will change as soon as a runner arrives from the battalion. There is no shift. There is only the next task. 16 hours is normal. 18 is common. Sleep comes in fragments. 10 minutes behind a truck wheel arch while someone else stands watch. 20 minutes on wooden crates between oxygen and acetylene cylinders that must not leak. You wake up with the smell of gasoline on your hands and the shape of a wrench pressed into your palm. This is not heroism. This is process under pressure. Aggregate replacement when possible. Field welding when necessary. Recovery by tractor when roads allow. By double-line pull when they do not. Safety margins are thin because mass, time, and terrain do not care about intentions. You lift 40 kilograms because no one else is free. You guide a driver by hand signals in darkness because radios are busy elsewhere. You accept that some failures will repeat because the right bearing was not available and the wrong one had to do. You will hear that others have it worse. Crews inside the armor, infantry in the open. That is also true, but none of them move without you. Your work decides whether 3 tanks appear at the start line or 9, whether a company keeps momentum at noon or stalls because of a seized idler and a leaking pump you did not catch. The margin between a stalled column and a moving one looks like just 1 more hour of your night. By the end of this story, you will see where a modern person breaks in this role. You will see how thirst and heat combine with noise and haste to erode judgment. You will see how shortages force choices that would never appear in peacetime. You will see how risk hides in routine actions, a lift, a cut, a tow. And you will see what we undervalue today: reliable water, predictable logistics, immediate medical care, and easy communication. In July 1943 near Kursk, a field repair technician had none of that. Yet armor rolled at dawn because someone like you dragged it back, fixed what could be fixed, and sent it forward. South and north of Kursk, the ground decides everything. Ridges, ravines, windbreaks, and small copses cut the fields into lanes. Dirt roads run between them. In dry weather they turn to powder and hang in the air all day. After a thunderstorm, they become ruts of sticky clay that swallow jack bases and tow hooks. The line of contact shifts every day. Yesterday's safe corner is today's target reference for enemy guns. Waypoints are simple: a broken well, a leaning telegraph pole, a burned truck that no one has time to move. Your unit sits close to the tanks, but not in their order of battle. You are the field repair and recovery element attached to a tank regiment. A small team, a few trucks, a welding set, tool chests, a trailer with oxygen and acetylene, timber blocks, chains, tow bars, and 2 heavy tractors, Comintern and Voroshilovets. Sometimes you get a captured tractor or a second ZIS-5 pressed into towing duties. There is no crane. There is a hand hoist and a tripod you can lash together out of spars if time allows. Most lifts happen with leverage, a trench under the hull, and a prayer you do not say out loud. Your tasks come in 3 forms. First, recovery. Reach a disabled machine in the gray zone, hook it, pull it out under cover, and get it moving or tow it back. Second, diagnosis. Decide in minutes whether a fix on the spot is possible, what tools and parts are needed, and whether the risk of staying outweighs the gain. Third, aggregation. Strip donors to keep runners on the line. A tank with a destroyed turret can still give you a final drive. A truck with a burned cab can still give you a leaf spring, a battery strap, a length of wire, a mirror, a clamp. Every donor is written off in someone's book, but on your ground the only ledger that matters is what keeps moving before dawn. Communication is basic and slow. Field telephones when lines are intact. Runners when they are not. A chalk mark on a fender to track a field decision. A folded note in a breast pocket when the rain starts. You receive positions and priorities late and incomplete. You learn to read tracks and smoke to find your machine. You learn to scan tree lines for the shape of a barrel and the glint of optics. You do not rely on maps alone because map symbols lag behind the shells that cut new edges into the front. The method is aggregate replacement whenever possible. Do not true a bent shaft in a field. Swap the unit. Do not weld a cracked spring unless you must. Replace it. Weld only when there is no other way, and only after you have blocked and grounded everything you can. Oxygen acetylene is your workhorse. You cut seized bolts, open torn plates, braze a tank seam, and stitch a cracked bracket so it survives a short run. You keep the cylinders away from heat and shrapnel, and you check valves by touch in the dark. Sparks and gasoline do not argue, they act. You organize your staging so they never meet. Your constraints are constant. Fuel is rationed. Clean water is scarce. Filters clog with dust in hours. Bearings run out. Track pins wear fast. Road wheels chip and crack. Spark plugs foul, and you clean them with a knife because you cannot waste solvent. Rubber is precious. Insulating tape becomes wire, twine, and rag in sequence. Every missing minor part can immobilize 40 tons of steel. You memorize which machines share components, which years of production changed hole spacing on a bracket, which supplier's casting runs long or short by a millimeter. Discipline is not rhetoric. unauthorized retreat, loss of equipment, or abandoning property without an order goes to tribunal. You sign for your tool roll and you guard it like a weapon. You sign for cylinders and keep logs of what was cut and when. You sign for a tractor and you will not leave it stuck because extraction is on you. You do not wander. You do not improvise with explosives. You ask for a sapper when a path crosses suspected mines, and if a sapper is not available, you probe, you mark, and you slow down instead of gambling minutes against lives. The climate in July is an extra enemy. Daytime heat pushes above 30 degrees Celsius. Metal burns bare hands. You use rags under palms and sleeves under forearms to reach into hulls. Sunstroke is a threat even when you do not notice it because you are crouched under a machine. Then a front rolls in and the field becomes clay. The same slope you drove up in the morning turns into a sliding face in the afternoon. Your tractor digs down instead of forward. You build road mats out of planks, rails, and brush. You wedge timbers under idlers, and you keep the pull straight because a sideways load will walk a tank off its supports and crush your work pit. Threats are layered. Artillery brackets your known routes. Enemy aircraft pick on anything that looks like a workshop or a fuel dump. Friendly fire is a risk whenever units leapfrog in a push. Your safest time to move is night, but night hides mines and ditches, and it makes hand signals and engine notes your only language with drivers. You adapt. A vertical arm for stop, a slow sweep for tension, a quick chop for slack, a clenched fist when weight comes on the rope. You keep everyone out of the bite when a line is under load because a snapped cable can cut in an instant. The repair area is not a building. It is a rectangle of ground behind a fold of earth with a canvas sheet slung low to keep light in and rain out. Fuel drums on one side, ammunition crates separated as far as space allows, cylinders in shade with caps on, a table that is not a table but two beams and a door, a pit that is not a pit but a trench you enlarge every time a hull rolls over it, a pile that says usable, another that says scrap, a third that says donor. You keep those piles honest because lies in those piles turn into failures on the road. Your crew is small and direct, a welder who can also cut and braze, a fitter who knows every thread size by touch, a tractor driver who can feel traction through his seat and stop before the toe goes diagonal, a rigger who understands blocks, lashings, and angles, a runner who brings orders and returns with a part or a person. Everyone jacks, everyone digs, everyone watches for smoke and listens for the rise and fall of shelling. You do not waste words, you confirm with a nod, and you act. The enemy's machines matter only as problems. A track gouge across a road means heavy armor crossed recently. A drip line of oil means a wounded vehicle limped out. A cluster of broken road wheel rubber points to a mine belt. You read these signs because they tell you where your own machines will fail next, and where you will need to be before the call comes. This is the ground on which you will try to work one day. Moving front, unreliable roads, simple tools, strict orders, constant shortages, heat and storms that reshuffle every plan. If you can see this clearly, the next step makes sense: food, water, and what happens to judgment when both run thin. Food is fuel, water is life and coolant at the same time, and that is the trap. There is a field kitchen when the line is stable. You get porridge, thin soup, bread, sometimes a tin of meat, sometimes a spoon of jam. Fresh vegetables are rare. Sugar is counted by lumps. Tea is a luxury because boiling costs fuel, and fuel belongs to tractors and welding sets first. You eat fast, standing or sitting on a toolbox, because calls arrive without pattern, and the work is never done. Clean water is the main problem. Wells exist, but many are dry or fouled by runoff. Roadside ditches hold water after storms, but it is brown and full of life you do not want inside you. Boiling solves the problem, but you cannot light a fire in the open when aircraft circle and the kitchen is far when you are on a job. So you ration. You carry one canteen and you stretch it by habit. You wet a rag instead of taking a sip. You swish water in your mouth and swallow only half. You avoid salt even when you crave it, because salt without water is a bad trade. The machines compete with you. Radiators bleed in heat. A tiny leak turns into steam at midday. A hose clamp that does not quite seal will mist away a liter while you focus on a seized pin. The V-type diesel in a tank will survive abuse, but it will not forgive running dry. Water level matters more than your comfort. You top off with what you have because there is no tap in the field. You sacrifice your canteen because that leader in the core keeps 40 tons of steel moving to the place where it must be tomorrow at dawn. Food gives you steady energy, but no cushion. Porridge fills the stomach and keeps your hand steady for an hour. Then you feel the slow drop. The soup is hot if you catch the kitchen at the right time, cold if you come late. Bread holds the day together. Canned meat appears and disappears without warning. Sweets are a rumor. Coffee does not exist for you. Tea exists when someone guards a kettle long enough to bring water to a boil, and when no one needs that same flame for a wrench heated to free a frozen nut. Alcohol is not your tool. There is an allowance on paper and a rare issue in practice. A drink before a lift or a cut is a bad idea. You need depth perception and a steady hand to set a tow hook, to lay a bead, to guide two machines across a trench in the dark. You are judged by results, not by stories, and results come from precision. Precision and heat do not mix with alcohol. Money does not move anything for you. There is pay, but no shop, no prices, no market within reach. You cannot buy a filter or a bearing. You can trade favors and small items. Cigarettes, matches, a spoon of sugar, a spare rag, a length of wire. A tool is personal responsibility. Losing one is not a shopping problem. It is a disciplinary problem and a practical one, because no one will hand you a new wrench while shells pass overhead. A day starts before first light. You eat what is there: half a mess tin of porridge, a cup of tea if the kitchen had time, and fuel. You fill your canteen if there is a safe well near the bivouac. If not, you wait, because taking water from a ditch at dawn is a way to start the day sick. The first call comes early. A tank sits with a broken track pin 2 fields forward. You take a jack, a box of pins of mixed wear, a sledge, a drift, and 2 men for security. By mid-morning the heat comes in, dust hangs. You feel your tongue dry and you count sips. You split your water in your head, 1 part for you, 1 part for the job you cannot anticipate. By noon you are under a vehicle pulling a sump or replacing a hose. You feel heat through sleeves. A drop of hot oil lands on your neck and you ignore it because the clamp must seat now or it will leak later and cost an hour you do not have. Your canteen is half gone and the radiator on the machine in front of you needs a top off. You stare at both. You choose the radiator. You tell yourself you will find a well on the road back. The well is a kilometer off the route, and the route changes. Because new orders come, you swallow air and you get back to work. In the evening, the field kitchen runs low. You manage soup and bread. You hear that water was boiled earlier and is gone now. Someone brings a kettle to your work area, but you are mid-tow and cannot stop. The tractor idles. The line with the load sings as the angle changes. You keep men out of the bite, call for slack, reset the hook, and feel the headache that is not from noise. It is from thirst. The tow completes at dusk. There is a bucket at the workshop with water for radiators. It is not drinking water. You fight the urge to steal a dipperful. You do not steal it. You walk to a nearby pond, fill your canteen, and stare at the surface. You know what is in that water. You bring it back. You boil it on a small stove made from a can while you check a weld. You drink it hot and flat because there is no time to wait. What breaks you is not hunger. Hunger is dull and manageable. What breaks you is thirst plus heat plus time pressure. Judgment erodes fast when your mouth is dry and your head rings from engine noise and sun. You start cutting corners. You take a sip from a ditch without boiling just this once and spend the next day weak and unfocused. Or you choose your throat over a radiator and a tank runs hot 10 minutes later and stops in a place where it cannot be towed safely. The choice looks small and personal. It is not. It is structural, and it arrives every day. Modern life hides this entire class of decisions. You expect clean water at a turn of a handle. You expect hot drinks in minutes. You expect fuel to be someone else's problem. Under Kursk in July, none of that is true. Every liter is a plan. Every kettle is a risk. Every ration is a trade with tomorrow's strength. You can hold this line for a day if you are lucky, 2 days if you are stubborn, a week only if the weather, the shelling, and the calls give you gaps you can use to rebuild reserves. Most weeks, they do not. Housing is whatever you can put over your head that night. A tent if there is fabric and time to raise it. The bed of a workshop truck if there is space between crates. A shallow scrape in the ground if there is shelling, and you do not want to be silhouetted against the skyline. Privacy does not exist. You sleep between oxygen cylinders, tow chains, and wooden boxes that all look the same in the dark. You keep a clear path to the outside because if a drum leaks or a cylinder hisses, you do not want to climb over your own gear to get out. There is no shower. Washing is a basin and a rag when water is available. Laundry is a rare luxury. Uniforms become stiff with dust and oil. Skin itches. Lice are routine, and you fight them with heat when a delousing unit passes by, or with powder if any is left. Most of the time you endure and scratch. Mosquitoes and flies do not care about your schedule. They come with the heat and the standing water after storms. You learn to tuck sleeves and trouser cuffs, not for style, but to cut down on bites while you work under a hull. Before a storm, the camp is a box of dust. Fine powder creeps into everything. Air cleaners clog fast. Tools feel gritty. Eyes burn. After a storm, the same ground turns into clay that grabs boots and swallows jack pads. The slope behind the workshop becomes a slide. You go down on your hands and knees to keep from falling while carrying a cylinder that must not be dropped. You build paths out of planks and brush. You stack stones under jack bases to stop them from sinking. You add a second set of chocks even when the truck looks solid because clay moves under weight you cannot see. Fire is the constant fear. Fuel drums sit close because space is limited, but you keep them in shade and away from sparks as much as the terrain allows. Oxygen and acetylene live under canvas with caps on and valves checked twice a day. You do not use oil on oxygen fittings. You do not smoke near cylinders, even if someone else lights up without thinking. You move the welding set downwind of the fuel. You ground your work if the job allows it. A single hot slug falling into spilled gasoline is enough to erase the night's work and everyone standing nearby. You keep a bucket of sand where a bucket of water would be convenient, and you keep a shovel and a blanket within reach. Lightning is not a story detail. Thunderstorms come quickly in July. A tent pole becomes a conductor. A truck roof becomes a drum. You disconnect chargers, cover open batteries, and pull a tarp over the bench when a front rolls in. You check the trench you sleep in for standing water because a puddle that seems harmless becomes a cold bath at 3 a.m. You raise crates off the ground on rails so water does not wick into them. You move cylinders to the driest spot because acetylene in a hot cylinder is dangerous, and acetylene in a waterlogged cylinder on its side is worse. Space is the second enemy after weather. Every usable square meter fills up with something essential: chains, slings, hooks, road wheels with chipped rubber you keep for emergency swaps, track links you counted and sorted by wear, a makeshift rack for shafts and bars that wants to topple when someone brushes past it in the dark. You label piles with chalk because nothing looks distinctive after midnight under a covered lamp. You draw a perimeter in your head where sparks are allowed and where they are not. You enforce that line without debate. Sanitation is basic: a slit trench at the edge of the bivouac, lime if available, often not. You wash hands with a cup of water and a sliver of soap that lives in your pocket. You keep food away from the work area when you can, but hunger often meets you at the bench. You learn to cover a tin with a rag between bites because flies will find it in seconds. Illness spreads fast when one person drinks from the wrong ditch. Dysentery is not dramatic in the moment. It simply takes strength away when strength is the only wealth you have. A normal night starts late because work stretches into darkness. You return with dust inside your boots and a ringing in your ears. You shake sand out of socks if there is time. You wipe your face with a wet cloth if there is water left. You check valves on cylinders by touch. You run a hand over hose couplings. You sniff for the sharp note of acetylene or the flat smell of gasoline. You lay down with your head against a toolbox so you will feel if someone moves it in an emergency. Sleep arrives because the body stops arguing, not because the conditions invite it. 20 minutes later, a runner lifts the canvas and says a tractor is stuck with a tank, half on the road, half in a ditch. Rain has started again. You put on wet boots because there is no dry pair. You step into mud that tries to keep your foot. You mark the path with a lantern shielded on 3 sides. You feel insect bites under your collar, and you ignore them because the tow line must be set before the road softens further. You listen for the hiss of a valve as you pass the cylinder rack, because a hiss now is a fire later. Sometimes the danger lives in small habits. A cigarette near the fuel drums because someone forgot where they stood downwind. A lamp left too high in a tent that shows through canvas to an aircraft overhead. A cylinder laid down because it is only for a minute. The minute stretches. The cylinder rolls. A valve knocks against a stone. Your brain replays that sound for days. You do not repeat the mistake. What breaks you here is not one disaster. It is accumulation. Heat you cannot escape while trying to sleep. Insects that wake you just as you drift off. The grit that never leaves your eyes and makes fine work harder. The smell of fuel that eats appetite. The mental load of fire risk at arm's length from where you eat and rest. You can accept dust for a day. You can accept mud for a day. You can accept a night without washing for a day. The strain comes when these days line up without a gap to reset. Modern expectations fail here. A room with a door, a shower when you want one. Ventilation you do not have to build out of a torn canvas and a stick. Power outlets and lights on a switch. Fire code distances between flammables. Pest control. Inspectors. Under Kursk in July, you are the inspector, the pest control, and the fire watch. And you are also the person who has to lift the road wheel and cut the bent bracket in the morning. You learn to make rules simple so you can hold them when tired. No flame within so many steps of cylinders, no cylinder without a cap, no lamp above shoulder height, no smoking near drums, ever, no sleeping without checking for hiss. The day ends when the ground says, it ends. If rain drains into your trench, you move. If wind threatens the canvas over your workbench, you lower it and finish the joint in cramped space. If a spark lands on a tarp, you smother it and replace the burned patch with whatever will hold. You live inside constraints you cannot negotiate with, and you keep working because the machines do not fix themselves and dawn does not delay. Work is a straight line from first light to whenever the last call ends. There is no shift. There is no clock. You stay on task because the machines that must move at dawn cannot wait for your rest. 16 hours is routine. 18 happens when a push is planned and the column must be ready. You learn to cut actions to the bone, walk with a purpose, lay tools in order, keep fasteners sorted by size in tins so your hand finds them in the dark. Do not waste motion. Do not repeat lifts. Save your back and your minutes because both vanish faster than you expect. Injuries are not news. A cable that hums under load can snap and whip. You keep people out of the bite, and you still see a line jump when the angle creeps. Jacks tilt on soft ground and pinch hands. Sharp edges turn small slips into blood and lost time. Gloves exist, but there are not enough, and they burn through on hot work in a day. Helmets exist, but the unit has fewer than the tasks demand, and you will take yours off to see or to fit your head under a hull. Sparks find cuffs, hot oil finds wrists. A bent bracket returns a punch when the saw breaks through. You manage risk with distance, blocking, and habit, not with equipment you do not have. Night recovery is the hardest work you will do. Daylight belongs to aircraft and artillery. Darkness belongs to mines, ditches, and confusion. You go forward with a tractor or two, a toolbox, a jack, blocks, a hand hoist, and a crew who know their roles without talking. Headlights are masked. You move by the low glow allowed under blackout rules, and by the shape of the road against the sky. Hand signals take over. Slow sweep for tension, chop for slack. Stop when a rope sings too high. If you shout, you lose control. If you wait, you lose the window before the next barrage. Diagnosis is a race with risk. When you reach a disabled machine in the gray zone, you have minutes. You look, listen, and touch. Broken track pin or thrown shoe, bent idler or cracked wheel, final drive noise or a locked hub, a hose that atomizes water when squeezed, a leak at a seam you can braze, a bracket you can stitch to survive a short run. You decide whether to fix here or tow now. If you guess wrong, you stay in place too long, or you tow a short distance only to stop again in a worse position. You learn the patterns of failure for your own tanks and for whatever the unit captured last week and pressed into service. You learn what you can swap in the field and what must wait for the rear. Tools are simple, which means technique matters. A hand hoist and a tripod will lift more than a man, but only if your anchors hold and your angles are right. A double line pull makes a tractor stronger, but only if you rig clean and keep the lines parallel. A long wrench is leverage. A cheater pipe is more leverage and more risk for the threads. Heat freeze seized fasteners, but heat near fuel lines is a negotiation with fate. You practice on scrap when there is a lull, because a lull is your only classroom. Schedules are a set of promises written in other people's needs. The regiment needs 9 tanks at the start line at dawn. The company commander wants 2 of them that are his by number. The battalion wants trucks ready to bring forward ammunition and fuel before noon. Your officer wants the tractors back in your area by midnight so they can tow again before the roads clog. You cannot satisfy every promise. You prioritize by effect. A single road wheel swapped now can save a tank for the morning. A deep repair started in the field can trap your crew and the tractor all night. You leave the deep repair for the workshop when you can, and you swallow the pride that wants to prove you can do it all on the spot. Paper pay exists, but money does not move metal here. You are on the rolls. You sign for your tool set. You sign for cylinders. You sign for the tractor. You will not see a shop or a price in weeks. What actually trades hands are favors and small items that save time. A coil of wire for a sensor, lead on an improvised setup. a packet of matches to light a stove that boils safe water, a strip of leather to pad a clamp. You keep a quiet ledger in your head, and you pay it back when you can, because someone will save your job tomorrow with a thing that did not exist an hour ago. People are the limiting factor. The unit runs with the crew it has, not with the crew it wants. The welder might also be your best rigger. The tractor driver might be the only person who can tune a magneto by ear. The runner who brings orders might also carry a part that will decide whether a tank moves at dawn. Some recruits are young because the war has been long. They carry and dig and learn fast, or they get sent to easier duties. You watch for fatigue in others because a tired hand makes a bad rig, and a bad rig makes a bad night. A typical day looks like this. Before sunrise, you check the area. Valves closed, sparks nowhere near fuel, tools in order. You drink tea if someone kept a flame alive. The first task comes with first light, a hull settled into a crater with a broken track. You take the jack, the drift, new track pins that are not new at all, and you go. You chock, you lift, you drive the pin, you set the shoe, you tell the driver to ease forward, you set the next shoe, you keep fingers clear. By mid-morning you are back at the workshop. A truck waits with a torn spring. You do not re-arch it in the field. You swap the pack with one from your donor rack and write a mental note to replace that donor before the next storm. At noon the sun turns the hulls into stoves. You work with rags under your hands. You hear shells in the distance and ignore them because they are far enough for now. In the afternoon, a radiator leaks along a seam. You drain, clean, flux, and braze. You pressure test by ear because gauges are busy elsewhere. You refill with water you would rather drink. The tractor returns and you load a road wheel onto the bed by muscle and leverage because there is no crane. You mark bolts and nuts by number with chalk so they return to the same holes. You clean spark plugs with a knife and a brush because solvent is for the worst jobs only. At dusk, the call comes for night recovery. A tank sits 2 fields forward with a jammed final drive. You will tow. You take 2 tractors because one will stall in the clay. You rig a double-line pull with a block at the tank's bow. You set anchors in soil that pretends to be firm. You call for tension. Watch the line straighten. Listen for the note that means load is evenly shared. The hull moves an arm's length and stops. You add cribbing under the idler. You adjust the angle. You pull again. The hull climbs. You reset the rig. You do this for an hour. You do not rush because rushing here costs lives. You complete the tow near midnight and move back by a new path because the first is now rutted and obvious. You return to the workshop when the day should have ended long ago. You check cylinders by habit. You cover the bench. You wipe tools and lay them out because tomorrow will come without permission. You eat cold food, if any is left. You drink water you boiled yourself. You lie down near the door and sleep in minutes because there is nothing left to keep you awake. Where you break is at the intersection of time and consequence. There is no done for the day. There is only done for now. Every unfinished task pushes into the next hour. Every hour gives the enemy time to reshuffle the ground you must cross. If you slow down for a rest, 9 tanks become 8 at dawn. 8 become 6 after the first engagement because the 2 that were late take a different path and bog down. The numbers do not care that you were tired. The result is visible to everyone at first light. Modern work culture assumes recovery. A shift ends. A day off appears. A supervisor measures load and tries to keep it within limits. Under Kursk in July, none of that fits. Your limits are set by heat, terrain, and the schedule of attacks. Your tools are simple. Your protections are minimal. Your mistakes are expensive beyond your own body. That knowledge becomes a weight you carry even when you sit down to take off your boots. Some people adapt. Some burn out. Most hover in between, and keep moving because there is no one else to take the wrench. Medicine here is triage. Supplies are thin. Antibiotics are rare. What you have is iodine, sulfa powder, bandage, a tourniquet, basic splints, and a small box of ampules that runs out fast. A medic treats the worst first. Heavy bleeding and chest wounds go ahead of everything. Your cuts, burns, sprains, and eye grit are self-care. That is not cruelty. That is math. Strain builds every hour. Back, shoulders, knees, and wrists take the load. A road wheel is not a gym exercise. It is mass with sharp edges. You lift with boards and blocks, but there are moments when you take weight because there is no other option. You feel it the next morning and the morning after that. There are no braces. There is only technique and the discipline to stop before a stupid injury happens. Hearing goes next. Engines at full load, hammer on pin, grinder on plate. Shells that do not land close still hit your ears. There are no earplugs. You stuff cotton when you can, and it falls out with sweat. Ringing becomes a background tone you stop noticing until silence feels wrong. Misheard hand signals at night come from this. So do headaches that make simple math slow. Eyes are always at risk. Dust, rust scale, sparks, and the white glare of welding. Goggles exist, but not enough. 1 or 2 masks for a whole team, passed from hand to hand. You learn to look away at the right moment, to shield with a sleeve, to grind from a safe angle so grit goes past, not into, the face. A flash from someone else's torch can leave you half blind for an hour. You keep working because no one else is free. Skin pays a steady price. Hot steel marks wrists and forearms. Oil rashes spread where sleeves stay soaked. Cuts happen on torn plate and chipped track. You flush with water if there is any. You paint iodine. You dust sulfa into a dirty wound and hope you got it early. Ointments help some burns seal and keep flies off. Then you wrap and go back to the job because the tow or the swap will not wait. Lungs take in everything the field throws at them. Dust from roads, soot from fires, exhaust from idling engines, vapors from gasoline, solvent, and paint. You try to work up wind. You fail often because wind shifts. Cough becomes normal. Throat feels raw by night. You promise yourself a mask next time, but next time the mask is on another task or lost to rain and mud. You make do with a rag and a knot behind the head, which filters almost nothing. Hands are your precision tools, and they break down. Blisters under callus, cracked skin that splits on the first sharp edge. Grease and solvent dissolve what is left. Gloves help for a day and fail on the second. You tape fingers to keep skin together. You keep nails short so they do not tear. You keep a needle in the kit to pull out metal slivers because waiting for a medic is not an option. Hydration and heat cause secondary damage. Thirst makes hands shake and judgment drift. You stand too quick and black out for a second under a hull. You mistake steam for smoke and waste minutes. You choose to drink from a ditch without boiling just once. And you pay with a day of weakness and cramps when you cannot afford either. You learn too late that performance falls apart before you feel sick. For women in the unit, the load is heavier in ways that are not visible in reports. Hygiene supplies are scarce. Cloth improvisations take time to wash and dry, and there is no time and no place. Dehydration to avoid bad latrines leads to urinary infections. Iron intake is low. Fatigue deepens. Lifting rules do not change. The track pin does not get lighter. The final drive does not care. Competence is questioned by default and must be proven daily while working with the same shortages and the same risks. Tetanus is a shadow over every dirty puncture. You clean and you hope the schedule of shots kept up. Often you do not know. You at least scrub with what you have and avoid closing a wound that still holds grit. Infection is the common enemy. Redness creeps from small cuts. Fever steals a night when there is no spare person to cover. You swallow pills when there are pills, and count them because the box will not be replaced soon. Triage at the aid post is blunt because it has to be. A crew pulled from a burned vehicle goes in first. A driver with a penetrating chest wound gets the only slot for surgery. You, with a deep cut across the palm from a slipped wrench, are handed gauze and told to come back later. Not urgent is not a judgment of character. It is a statement about survival odds and scarce hands. A typical day makes the pattern clear. Morning. You cut a track pin that seized and the drift slips. A shard scores your forearm. You rinse with the same water you saved for tea, paint iodine, and tape a pad over it. Midday. You braze a seam on a leaking radiator. The torch flares. Your glove smokes. You pull back with a small flash burn on the wrist. Ointment on, sleeve down, job finished, because the tractor is already backing to the tow point. Evening. Grit in the eye after a grinder pass. The mask was with the welder at another job. You blink it out, lift the lid of a canteen, wash the eye with a mouthful, and taste rust and dust all the way down. Where you break is at the point where later never comes. The cut you meant to clean properly stays under a dirty bandage for 2 days and turns hot. The ringing in your ears becomes permanent. A back spasm locks you when you lean under a hull, and there is no one spare to take your place. The medic does not ignore you. The medic has a queue of people who will die without immediate action. You do not make that list, so you return to work with a wrapped hand and a promise to yourself you will rest tomorrow. Tomorrow fills before breakfast. Modern expectations miss this reality. You think of care as available. You think of protection as standard. You think of fatigue as a reason to stop. Here, care is rationed. Protection is shared and often missing. Fatigue is a constant you plan around, not a signal to stand down. The system runs on people who accept that gap and still produce reliable work with damaged hands and tired eyes. Discipline is the wall at your back. Orders are not advice. Unauthorized retreat, abandoning equipment, or losing state property without a written order goes to tribunal. You sign for your tool roll and for your tractor. If you leave them, you account for it in writing with witnesses. If you cannot produce those, you face charges. This is not theater. This is how the Army keeps machines on the field when fear and fatigue would otherwise pull them off. Artillery and aircraft make the rules outside your work area. Shelling can start without pattern and bracket the road you used an hour ago. You learn the sound of ranging shots and you count seconds between impacts to judge if the next one will walk toward you. You move when the pattern opens and you freeze when it closes. Aircraft are worse because they punish shape and shine. A line of drums under canvas still looks like supply to a pilot. A parked tractor with a tow bar still looks like a target. You cut silhouettes, break up outlines, throw dirty tarps, and never leave a gleam on metal if you can help it. Mines are a quiet threat that punishes routine. Any track gap can hide a pressure plate. Any bush can hide a pull wire. Recovery routes are safe only once, and then only until the enemy sees them. Sappers are the right answer. You call them whenever you can. When you cannot, you probe with a bayonet. You mark with sticks and rags. You keep to the previous tracks exactly, and you never, ever step over a wire you cannot see the end of. You respect ditches that look harmless because they collect the things men leave for other men. You slow down not because you like slow, but because fast here is expensive later. Friendly fire is part of the same chaos. Lines overlap. Units leap ahead, then fall back. Passwords change, and runners arrive late. You carry panels and flags for identification when daylight allows, but daylight also invites aircraft, so you choose the lesser risk. At night, you rely on pre-arranged light signals you keep low and brief. You brief drivers that a wrong turn in darkness can cross into someone else's field of fire. You chalk big numbers and signs on your vehicles when the plan says you will approach a position that does not know you. You do not trust that plan completely. Security is not a separate job. It is your job when crew strength runs thin. The fuel and ammunition dump must be guarded. You are handed a watch schedule and a rifle, and you take a post after a 16-hour day because no one else is free. You count silhouettes as they move near the perimeter. You challenge with the password. You keep the lamp shaded. You listen for the hiss of a leak as carefully as for the crack of a twig. You move the cylinders to deeper shade in the day so heat does not build, and you keep people from cutting across the line between fuel and welding area even if it saves them 10 steps. Paperwork exists even here because law rides with you. A lost chain, a missing jack, a broken gauge, each goes on a form. A tractor damaged by a fragment. You record when and where because the depot will ask. A tank abandoned without a tow attempt. That is a line you do not cross without an order. When an order does come, you keep it and the name on it. The same rules that feel harsh protect you when you make the right call, and someone later wants a scapegoat. A routine day under this regime looks like this. Late morning, a call comes. A medium tank sits forward of a hedgerow, track shed on the right, suspected mines nearby, intermittent shelling. Sappers are committed elsewhere. The instruction from the regiment is short. Recover if possible, do not lose the tractor. You load blocks, pins, a jack, and a hand hoist. You drive out along the previous tracks, and you stop short. You probe. You lay a marked path wide enough for the tractor's front axle. You bring the tractor forward a meter at a time by hand signals. You anchor in soil that pretends to be firm. You rig a double-line pull to keep load within limits. Shells land 2 fields left. You count the pause. You pull during the pause. The hull moves, then settles. You reset blocks. You keep the crew out of the bite. You do not rush when rushing is what your nerves want. A fragment nicks the tractor's radiator. You hear the change in tone. You do not panic. You tow the tank to the hedgerow and then to the track you marked. You top the radiator from your canteen and from a bucket at the hedgerow because movement beats arguments. You move back before the pattern changes. Another day the threat is from your own side. Dusk. You bring a repaired truck forward to a new ammunition point. The position was an enemy gun pit in the morning. Now it is yours. The infantry company holding it does not know your truck or your faces. You keep lights masked. You roll at walking pace. A sentry challenges. Your driver answers with the password that changed 2 hours ago. The sentry raises his weapon. You stop and repeat the challenge correctly because the runner found you on the road 5 minutes earlier with the update. The truck rolls in, and you exhale only when the barrels on the parapet tilt back toward the field. Guard duty folds into this without mercy. After midnight, you pace the dump perimeter with a rifle and a whistle. The sky flashes far away. You smell fuel, and you cannot decide if it is a leak or your own clothes. You stop at the cylinder rack and lay a hand on each valve. No hiss. You check the tarp ties because wind is up. You mark 2 wet spots near the fuel drums with chalk to see if they grow by the next pass. You log the time on a board that is only a crate lid with pencil marks. You finish the watch and lie down for 20 minutes before the first light call. Where you break is in the space between risk and rule. You are told not to lose equipment. You are also told not to lose people. The ground and the clock force you to choose which order to honor every time something goes wrong. Leave a tank because shelling makes the road a funnel and you risk the tribunal. Stay and you risk your crew. Move at night to avoid aircraft and you risk a mine. Move by day and you risk a pilot with time to spare. The legal and physical threats stack instead of canceling. Decision fatigue sets in. You start to want a rule that decides for you. There is not one. Modern expectations miss this double pressure. Today you expect clear zones of safety. You expect that a workplace is either a work site or a guard post, not both in the same 10 meters. You expect that the law will judge context. Here, context is a line on a form and a signature. You protect yourself by making good choices and by documenting them when you can. You protect your crew by teaching the habits that keep them alive when choices are bad all around. Heat rewrites work. By late morning, the air temperature pushes above 30 degrees Celsius. Sun on armor makes surfaces too hot to touch with bare hands. You wrap rags around palms and forearms to reach into compartments. Coolant expands and finds every weak joint. A radiator cap that seals at night vents steam at noon. A soft hose turns slick and creeps under a clamp. Oil thins. Pressure drops at idle, and bearings complain first on engines that were already tired. Fan belts glaze and start to slip. You mark pulley grooves with chalk to see if the belt walks when you rev. You shift heavy lifts to dawn and dusk when you can. Most days you cannot. Dust is a second enemy that never stops arriving. Road convoys grind the topsoil into powder. It hangs and flows into carburetors, magnetos, and air cleaners. Oil bath filters fill in hours instead of days. You drain the cup, scrape the sludge, rinse with a rag, and refill with engine oil that you would rather put in a crankcase. If you fall behind, grit gets past the bath and turns piston rings and cylinders into a grinding pair. On trucks, the carburetor jets clog, the engine starves and backfires. On diesels, the governor sticks. Electrical contacts film over and lose spark. Grease on pins becomes a lapping paste. You cover open parts and you move with lids closed, but work demands open covers and the wind does not cooperate. Storms flip the same roads into traps within an hour. Clay turns to glue, tires load up and become slick drums. Jacks punch holes and lean. You carry base plates cut from doors and rails. You crib with brush, poles, and track links. You widen approaches because one straight pull beats 3 diagonal attempts that only dig deeper. You double the line and keep angles shallow. You stop volunteers from just pushing once more because a shove at the wrong moment slides a hull sideways off supports. Lightning drives you to ground welding sets and cover batteries. You lower canvas and accept cramped work rather than show light to the sky. Smoke sits over everything, burning fuel, burning crops, burned machines. Vision shortens, eyes sting. You work upwind when there is an upwind. When the wind shifts, you tie a rag over mouth and nose and know it is theater more than filter. Soot settles on fresh welds and fouls flux. You brush, braze, brush again. You teach new hands to tell the difference between steam from a radiator and smoke from oil, because the first calls for water and the second calls for a fire blanket and a shout. Ground around the workshop is a map of spills and traps. Oil pans drip. Fuel cans sweat at seams. Solvent runs to the low corner and stays because drainage is bad. You throw sand on slick patches. You keep spark work and open flame on the far side of an imaginary line that you repeat to everyone who passes. You route battery chargers away from puddles. You store oxygen and acetylene where rain cannot pool around bases. You keep funnels and clean cans for radiator water separate from everything that ever saw fuel. Machines suffer first at their edges. Rubber on road wheels chips in heat and delaminates when a driver turns too tight on dry ground. Track pins wear fast with dust. Holes bellmouth and shoes walk. Seals in final drives and gearboxes weep when grit works under lips. After storms, water finds the same lips and emulsifies oil. Brake linings swell and drag. You drain, refill, and curse the lost leaders. You keep a list of units that must be checked again after the next run, even if the crew swears the sound has gone away. People pay the rest. Heat exhaustion arrives quiet. Hands tremble. Focus narrows. You stand up too fast and the world turns gray for a second under a hull that does not care where your head is. After storms, wet boots raise blisters and skin softens. You cut insoles from cardboard and change socks when you can. You salt food lightly because water is short and dehydration hides inside good intentions. You teach the crew to rotate tasks so no one stays under sun or in fumes too long, but rotation ends when the call queue grows. A dry day looks like this. Morning. You service air cleaners on 6 vehicles before the column forms. Cups off, sludge out, cups on, oil to the line. You pull and wash plugs on a truck that dies at throttle. The jet is half blocked with dust you could count as sand. Midday. 3 tanks return with slow power loss and black smoke. You clean intakes, check linkage, and squeeze hoses for weak spots. The metal burns through rags. You refill radiators with water the crew carried instead of drinking. By evening, the wind drops and dust stays low like fog. You mark every vehicle that still breathes heavy for a second pass at night, because daylight belongs to aircraft, and you will not risk open hoods on the road. A wet day writes a different list. Rain hits hard after noon. A tractor burying itself to the axle calls for help. You prep 2 base plates and a block. You unload track links to build a mat. You rig a double-line pull with anchors far back on firm ground. You move a meter, reset, move a meter, reset. Every reset is mud and rope and a check that no line saws against metal. Dusk brings smoke from a burning depot 2 kilometers away. The wind swings and pushes it over your work area. You shield the torch and finish a braze that must hold, or the job repeats in the same clay tomorrow. Where you break is not glamour. It is breath and skin and patience eroded by weather. The air is never clean. The ground is never stable. Heat and dust steal reliability from machines and judgment from people. Storms steal traction and time. Smoke steals vision and appetite. Every fix takes longer than it should and fails sooner than it would on a paved road with clean air and steady power. You can fight 1 element. You can fight 2 for a while. 3 at once make your rules bend, and bent rules cut into safety and quality until something gives. Modern life hides these taxes. Asphalt holds jacks. Climate control keeps hands steady. Filtration keeps engines sweet. Drainage takes spills away. Under Kursk in July, you build all of that from boards, rags, and habit, and you rebuild it after every storm. When people admire speed in combat service support, they rarely count the hours lost to weather that does not care about plans. Pay exists on paper and arrives when headquarters catches up, but it does not move anything at the front. There is no market, no shop, no catalog you can call. Your real economy is rations, favors, and small items that save time. Cigarettes, matches, sugar cubes, a spare rag, a length of wire, a strip of leather, a candle stub. These buy minutes, and minutes buy working machines by dawn. A part is not expensive or cheap. It is available, recoverable, or improvise. That is the only price scale that matters. Inside the unit, a second economy forms. You trade a packet of cigarettes for a coil of spring wire that will stand in for missing cotter pins. You swap a pair of decent gloves, too thick for welding, but fine for rigging, for a road wheel nut with good threads pulled from a donor. You pass a spoon of sugar to the tractor driver who will idle 10 extra minutes while you check a leak, because that idle saves you an hour tomorrow. None of this is written down. All of it is remembered. Tools are not communal. They are signed to a person. Lose one, and it is not, "I will buy another." It is a formal reprimand and a hole in your daily work. Every spanner is stamped and marked with a punch. You roll the set tight at night and count pieces by touch. If a wrench is missing, you walk the ground with a lantern until you find it. The rule is not romantic. A missing tool tomorrow in a field under shelling is a job that cannot be done, and a job that cannot be done becomes a vehicle that does not move when it must. There is no consumer choice. You cannot order a filter or a bearing. You take one from a donor, you rework one that is almost right, or you run without, and accept the failure window that comes with that decision. You do not buy safety or convenience. You build them from scrap and habit. A strip of inner tube becomes insulation. A cut-down door becomes a jack base. A length of fencing wire becomes a stay. A tin can becomes a small stove that boils drinking water because the kitchen is somewhere else and aircraft are still hunting. Leave does not happen because you are tired. Transfer to the rear happens when a doctor writes it and a commander agrees, and both are rare. Letters home are censored and travel slowly. Parcels may arrive and may not. Even when a parcel comes, it brings comfort items, soap, socks, sweets that help, but do not change how you work. The front's economy is time, metal, and hands. Nothing in a parcel can replace those. On a typical day, the basket of what you consume looks like this: half a mess tin of porridge and a cup of tea in the dim light before sunrise. A piece of bread mid-morning eaten standing over an open engine bay. 2 or 3 sips from a canteen that you stretch on purpose because you know you will need water for a radiator. 1 cigarette traded for 2 lengths of stiff wire that you shape into makeshift cotter pins. A spoon of sugar folded into thick tea after dark because it steadies hands for 1 more hour. A strip of rag torn from a worn-out shirt to pad a clamp. A match struck for a small stove to boil ditch water in a can because there is no safe well on this track. The barter rate changes with weather and workload. After a dust storm, an oil bath air cleaner screen is worth more than a pack of cigarettes because it saves an engine. On a wet night, a dry rag is worth 2 favors because hands cannot grip slick steel without it. When a welding tip clogs and there is no spare, a single thin wire small enough to clear the orifice is suddenly the most valuable thing in the area. You carry a few in your pocket not because you planned perfectly, but because you learned what halts a job at 11 at night. Discipline overlays even this economy. You do not trade state property out of the unit. You do not swap ammunition or fuel for anything. You do not cut up issued gear without permission unless a life is at stake. You learn the edges of what is tolerated because punishment wastes more than time. It removes people from the field who know how to keep machines moving. What breaks you is the realization that money has no leverage here. You cannot throw rubles at a seized bearing or a missing trackpad. You cannot pay a delivery service to drop a radiator hose at your position. You cannot upgrade your safety with a card. Only relationships, foresight, and craft move the needle. You must anticipate what will fail, collect scraps others ignore, and store them where you can find them in the dark. It is a constant mental ledger with no receipts and no balance except the vehicles that roll out at dawn. Modern expectations hide this gap. You are used to choice and rapid replacement. Here, choice is a rack of donor parts you stripped last week, and replacement is a piece you filed to fit because the bolt pattern changed mid-year in the factory, and no one told your unit. You are used to safety as a product. Here, safety is a rule you enforce when tired. You are used to paying for speed. Here, speed is built the slow way, by an orderly bench, a memorized rigging plan, and a pocket full of small pieces that turn an impossible job into a merely difficult one. Uniform is a rule, not decoration. You wear what is issued and what still fits after hard use. Boots, trousers, jacket, cap, badges and numbers as ordered. You keep it in order because inspections still happen, even in a field workshop. Personal style does not exist. A scarf or a private patch is a distraction and draws comments you do not need. Grease and dust mark everyone the same by noon. That equality does not change the hierarchy above you. Hierarchy is vertical and constant. Orders flow down, reports flow up. Initiative is allowed only inside the frame your officer sets. A clever shortcut that breaks a rule is a problem even if it works once. You present options, you recommend one, you act when told. If the situation changes under fire, you choose, you document, and you live with the result. When an order conflicts with safety, you argue once, clearly and without heat. If the order stands, you execute, or you ask for a written instruction. That piece of paper can protect your crew later when questions arrive. Space is always shared. You work elbow to elbow. You sleep shoulder to shoulder. You eat inches from tools. Personal boundaries compress to zero. A toolbox is your desk, locker, and sometimes pillow. You cut conversation to essential words because privacy is not coming back soon. You keep your temper under control because a small argument next to fuel and cylinders is not a small thing. You learn to move through the same 3 meters with 5 people and a crate without stepping on a hand or kicking a wrench. Information is rationed. You learn the job at hand and a little more. You do not get the whole plan. Not because someone wants to frustrate you, but because extra details can leak or become stale before they reach you. Passwords change, routes change, timing changes. You adapt and you verify. You do not repeat rumors. You do not ask for unit dispositions you do not need to do your job. You keep maps covered and notes short. You memorize what matters and you burn what should not be found. Women in the repair crew carry the same loads and the extra load of proof. Competence is questioned by default. Every correct call, every clean weld, every safe rig earns ground that can be lost with one small mistake others would be allowed to learn from. Hygiene is harder, privacy is less. Heavy lifts do not get lighter. The only path is the same as for men: quiet reliability and results. Leadership that understands this assigns tasks for skill, not stereotype. Leadership that does not forces workarounds that waste time and energy. Responsibility is personal, even when freedom is not. You sign for tools, you sign for cylinders, you sign for the tractor. Those signatures follow you. If a wrench goes missing after a 20-hour stretch, it is still your problem. If a cylinder valve leaks, you should have caught it. If a tractor bogs because you chose a bad line, the tow becomes your liability. The system assumes you own your task results. It also assumes you will keep working while owning them. Speech is measured. You propose, not proclaim. You avoid complaints that offer no solution. You keep your voice level in briefings because a raised tone is a waste of air and a mark against you. You save sarcasm for your head. You do not undercut your officer in front of the crew. You handle disagreements in 2 sentences in private and then move on. Recognition is uneven. A clean night recovery that saves a tank gets a nod and the next job. A mistake gets a report and maybe a hearing. That imbalance is not malice, it is throughput. The war rewards units with fuel and priority, not individuals with medals in a field workshop. You learn to value internal measures, a bench in order at midnight, a rig that holds first time, a team that sets hooks silently and safely. A typical day shows how these limits feel. Morning inspection comes while you are already under a truck. You slide out, present your tool roll, answer short questions, and return to work. Midday you propose a 2-tractor, 2-block rig to pull a hull that sank in clay. Your officer hesitates because the schedule is tight. You explain the angles and the load. He nods once. The responsibility stays with you. You brief the crew in 30 seconds, set rolls, and execute. Evening, a new runner brings a password update and a route change that contradicts your plan to recover a donor truck. You do not argue. You rewrite the plan with what you have and move. Where you break is at the point where low freedom meets full accountability. You cannot set policy. You cannot buy parts. You cannot change the map. You still carry the weight when a job fails. You still stand in front of your officer when a tool is missing after a move in the rain. You still explain why you chose the left path instead of the right when the left held water and cost an hour. The only relief is a crew that works like a machine and an officer who reads results, not rumors. You cannot count on either every day. Modern expectations do not fit. You expect autonomy when the stakes are high. You expect feedback loops that feel fair. You expect space and privacy to reset. Here you receive narrow lanes, delayed praise, and constant proximity. Your best defenses are clean process, clear briefings, and habits that survive fatigue. You build a small island of standards inside a moving front, and you protect it because everything else shifts without asking. You would not last a day here for 3 concrete reasons. First, tempo with full responsibility and no pause. The clock does not stop. There is no shift end. Every hour is attached to consequences at dawn. A tank that does not move is a crew without a vehicle and a company that starts thinner than planned. You carry that weight while tired, thirsty, and short on hands. Your margin for error is small. A misread sound, a rushed rig, a missed crack in a joint, and the failure appears on the road under fire, not in a quiet bay. Second, permanent shortage that forces you to spend judgment instead of money. No parts on demand, no catalog, no deliveries. You trade time, scrap, and favors. You strip donors. You fit near matches. You accept temporary fixes because there is no alternative. You plan with what you have, not with what would be ideal. Every decision costs reliability later, and you will own that failure if it returns. Modern experience teaches you to escalate and procure. Here you anticipate and improvise, or the work stops. Third, risk built into routine actions, tow lines under load, jacks on clay, fuel and cylinders within arm's reach, mines near the route, artillery that brackets roads by habit, aircraft that hunt outlines, night movement that hides ditches and passwords, fire risk from one careless ember. The job cannot be made safe. It can only be made less dangerous by discipline. Mistakes travel fast. A misplaced foot, a poor anchor, a lamp hung too high under canvas. The system offers rules, not rescue. Add the environmental tax that never lets up, heat that pushes hands off steel, dust that eats engines and eyes, storms that turn roads into glue, and tripods into liabilities, smoke that steals depth and appetite, oil and solvent underfoot. None of this is a single crisis. It is drag on every task and a multiplier on every delay. This is what breaks a modern person, not one big scene. Accumulation, thirst plus noise plus heat, long hours plus narrow authority plus full accountability. Shortages that make you choose between your canteen and a radiator, between a safe lift and a fast lift, between a clean repair in the rear and a field fix under shelling. Decision fatigue arrives first, then small errors. Then a night where a line parts because the angle was off by a hand's breadth, and you were too tired to reset it. Your tools are process and habit, aggregate replacement when it saves time, welding when nothing else will hold, clear rigging plans, a bench that stays ordered even at midnight, valves checked by touch, no one in the bite, anchors tested before load, lamps low, caps on cylinders, no flame near drums, passwords updated and repeated, routes marked and rechecked, all of it done while short of water, sleep, and hands. What people underestimate today is simple: the value of reliable infrastructure, clean water at a turn, spare parts with catalog numbers, lifts that obey buttons and ratings, power that does not blink, drainage that carries spills away, standard safety gear on every face and hand, instant communication that closes loops in seconds, medical care that treats small injuries before they become big ones, logistics that let technicians be technicians instead of scavengers and traders of wire, rags, and favors. Translate those comforts back into July 1943. Water is a ration and a coolant. Parts are a field of donor hulks and a memory for hole spacing and spline counts. Lifts are timber, soil, and angles. Power is a torch and a battery you protect from rain. Drainage is a shovel and a trench you dig yourself. Safety gear is a mask shared by a squad and gloves that last a day. Communication is a runner in mud. Care is gauze and iodine when the medic's tent is full of people who will not live without surgery. What keeps machines moving is not hero language. It is reliable craft under pressure. A pinned track repaired by drift and sledge with fingers kept out of pinch points. A radiator seam brazed clean and tested by ear. An idler cribbed and lifted on a base plate cut from a door. A double-line pull that lifts a hull the last half-meter out of clay because the anchors are right and the angles are honest. A tractor driver who stops a second early when the rope starts to sing. A welder who closes the valve without looking. A fitter who counts splines by touch in the dark. The day ends the way it started, with choices that have no perfect answer. Do you tow now and risk a mine in the dark, or wait and risk aircraft and artillery at first light? Do you cannibalize a donor that could be fixed in a week, or save it and lose a runner tomorrow morning? Do you keep the crew for a deep job that might fail in the field, or push the hull back to the rear and gamble the road? None of these questions have clean solutions. You decide, you document when you can, and you accept the cost. If you lasted a day, you would feel it in your hands, your lungs, and your head. The hands from heat, edges, and vibration. The lungs from dust and smoke. The head from noise, dehydration, and a dozen small deadlines that all claim urgent. If you stayed a week, you would either build habits that hold under fatigue, or you would start making mistakes that the ground punishes immediately. Most people break where habit should be. They skip a check. They rush a rig. They drink from a ditch. They step off a known track. The system is unforgiving because physics and schedules do not negotiate. The lesson is not that the past was raw and the present is soft. The lesson is that modern reliability rests on a network of invisible supports that did not exist then. Water treatment, standardization, supply, power, training with time built in, protective equipment in depth. When those supports vanish, work collapses to its fundamentals: mass, leverage, heat, time, and human judgment under pressure. In July 1943 near Kursk, field repair lived at that level all day and all night. What you undervalue today is the freedom to focus on the job because the environment and the supply chain cooperate. In this place and time, the environment and the supply chain are the job. The technician keeps armor moving not by asking for better conditions, but by making correct calls inside bad ones. That is why a second's mistake costs a vehicle and a crew. That is why a well-run team changes the morning count by 3 machines. That is why you would not last a day without habits, discipline, and a tolerance for pressure that few people train for now.